Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week, concluding 80s Movies Month, I am discussing the 1988 movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This is based on the 1981 novel Who Censored Roger Rabbit by Gary K. Wolfe. And the first time I saw this movie was years ago on New Year's Eve over my cousin's house. I was 15 years old at the time, and we had gotten there early, so we were just watching a few movies, and this was one of them. And it was just a small group of us. It was me, my siblings, my cousins, and one of my cousins, he was just sharing information throughout, and which was a fun way to watch it because he had seen it before multiple times, and he'd be like, no, this is this. And like, it was just like an interesting way to watch the movie. He would just immediately debunk stuff and immediately explain things. So it was just really fun. And I will say right off the bat that something I really love about this movie is how seamlessly they blend the live action with the animation. And I just love this really creative, imaginative concept of humans coexisting with cartoons. I think that's so much fun. I just really, really love the universe of this movie. And I think it's really well done. And even as a kid, I always loved the idea of cartoons breaking the fourth wall, interacting with our world, with humans, because the only other movie I had watched growing up over and over, and I'm sure you already know, if you are a 90s kid like I am, growing up watching a live-action animated movie, Space Jam. And that movie, though, if you take off the nostalgia goggles, it's really not, it doesn't really hold up well. But it's a fun movie, but it's one of those movies that it's like, okay, it's really not that great in terms of the plot. However, this movie, it's extremely well done with the plot, with the writing, with the world building, with the characters. And it's just one of those movies that never gets old, that truly is for all ages. Unlike Space Jam, which really is for kids, obviously. But this one, it's just, I mean, I first watched it as a teenager and I loved it. And rewatching it now, I haven't seen it in a while. It holds up so well. And even with the beginning of the movie, with that cartoon of Roger Rabbit and the baby in that cartoon they're doing, the maroon cartoon, What's Cooking? And then when they yell cut, and then just breaks that reality of the fact that these are cartoons, but they are acting. They're in this world where they gotta make a living, so this is them doing a scene. When you see the baby, and now he's like a man talking. I just remember first watching that being like, oh, this is really interesting. So in this world, these cartoons, they are just living creatures amongst the humans. And I just really loved that first watching this. I love all the random cameos and things with other Disney characters, like with Dumbo, when that maroon guy saying, oh, it's just Dumbo, I'm renting him off of Disney. I also got half of the cast of Fantasia. And then you see the brooms from Fantasia. So then, of course, when we meet Eddie Valiant, played by Bob Hoskins, the private detective hired to find out, just snoop around and find out, dig up dirt basically on Roger Rabbit's wife, Jessica Rabbit. And Jessica Rabbit is so hyper-sexualized, which even then I was like, my goodness, it's kind of overboard with the sexuality of this character. The way she's drawn, as she said, that iconic quote, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. But when Eddie goes to see her show and she's singing and all of the men are just lusting after her. And of course we see how Eddie, this really serious character, and how, so it's a great juxtaposition with the fact that, you know, he hates Toontown, and of course when he's with Roger Rabbit, how he's like the wacky lovable, and he knows his purpose of making people laugh. So it's all about the value of laughter and having a sense of humor. So I really love too, though, how, because there were certain things I forgot. So I always say that I love when I can watch something and it feels like I'm watching it for the first time again. So for instance, the whole backstory with Eddie, how a Toon had killed his brother. And then when he goes to his office, we see Valiant and Valiant. So then we learn through all of that, and we see with the camera panning through the office, seeing all of the newspaper articles. So we learn how they had been partners, private investigator partners together. So poor Eddie, still really coping with that loss. And we see, though, how he turns to booze. He's constantly drinking throughout the movie. But then when he goes to that underground club thing where it's only for humans and the tunes perform for the humans, and then when he's talking to Betty Boop, and then when he sees Jessica Rabbit, though, and then when he says that thing about, oh wow, she's married to Roger Rabbit, and then Betty Boop says, yeah, what a lucky gal. And it's cute, and she picks up his jaw because his jaw hanging open. But I also had forgotten too before that, with also then when we meet Marvin Acme, he does that thing with the invisible ink, or the reappearing, disappearing ink. But when before with the performances with Daffy Duck and Donald Duck, I totally forgot that for some reason. And it's just, Daffy is really, really unhinged in this piano act with Donald Duck. And it's so funny when he sings, does anyone know what this duck's saying with Donald? Because that's the whole thing with Donald Duck. You never understand what he's saying, or you just vaguely understand here and there what he's saying. But Daffy, he's just really crazy with the performing, as you expect from Looney Tunes characters, totally just off the wall wackiness, and the whole thing with the piano playing, and he's saying, oh, it's the last time I work with a duck with a speech impediment. And then when the whole thing just ends, and the owner guy, Acme, saying, oh, they never get to finish their acts, that's so great. So of course, Acme too, how that's part of the Looney Tune universe, all of the supplies, everything, it's always Acme. And then in this universe, we learn about that company, Cloverleaf, how they are this conglomerate company wanting to buy everything. And then we learn about how they want to buy Toontown. And then afterwards, with the whole thing with the patty cake incident, when Eddie takes those pictures. And I remember as a 15-year-old, I didn't get that euphemism. So then my cousin just blatantly said, oh, it's a euphemism for, like, as if she had been sleeping with him. And then I was like, oh, okay. So then it's funny, but then you see, like, they're literally playing patty cake. But poor Roger then is so heartbroken. And even, too, with him, when they give him a drink and he just really goes insane. He just has, like, one shot of alcohol. But then the next day, when the guy had been killed, Acme, and it's led to believe that it's likely Roger did it. So there we go, the whole point of the movie. Who framed Roger Rabbit? He didn't kill Acme, so who did? And then, of course, when we meet the villain, which I didn't realize he's played by Christopher Lloyd, of course, best known as Doc Brown from Back to the Future. But he really is a really sinister, creepy villain. And of course, all dressed in black. And we learn about his thing with the dip, that concoction he made that kills Toons. That's so terrible when he takes that poor clown shoe and just dips it into the dip, and then that's it. Aw, the poor Toon. Aw. But then when Roger goes to Eddie because he needs help to clear his name because he's innocent in all of this, but he's been framed for murder. So obviously, of course, Roger, the epitome of a wacky, zany cartoon, taking all of the slapstick from all of those, since this movie is set in 1947, which I forgot that too. So that era of where really Looney Tunes was at its height and all that stuff. But then the whole thing where he handcuffs himself to Eddie, so then Eddie's really stuck with him then for a bit, so he has no choice but to help him. And then when Eddie goes to the bar and he's talking to Dolores again, that woman Dolores who helps Eddie out. And I love the part, I always loved this part with the whole thing with when he's trying to saw off the handcuffs. And then he says to Roger Rabbit, will you stop moving? And then Roger slips out of the handcuff and he just is holding the chest then. He's like, how's this? He's like, that's great, better, thanks. And then all of a sudden he looks and he's like, wait. Like, he's out of the handcuff and he slips his hands back in. And he has that, like, sheepish grin. I just love that grin, like that grin of his. And he just says, you mean to tell me you could have taken your hand out of the cuff the entire time? And Roger says, not any time, only when it was funny. That's a great, and it really was funny. I mean, I still find that part hilarious because, again, with Roger being the opposite of Eddie, Roger, this extremely happy Toon, knowing his purpose and knowing that sometimes people need a laugh, and how Eddie really doesn't understand that because Eddie holding a grudge against Toons. And the whole thing when he keeps saying, I don't work for Toons, and he just gets really angry when people say that, like, as if they look down on him for that. Roger, though, never losing his resilient, happy spirit, except for obviously the whole thing with his wife when he just is super upset, and he just knows though that his wife had been set up for it, because it always keeps pointing to the fact that maybe she's not as loyal to him as she seems, because then also later when she knocks him out, so it's like set up as if she really is trying to betray Roger, but then of course we know that's not the case. But the whole scene then when they go to the movies, and back then too, when they had newsreels before the movies, stuff like that. And then when Eddie opens up to Roger then about the whole thing with the dark past, unfortunately, and the whole tragic story about Attune killing his brother, dropped a piano on him, and then he talks about the guy, how he had burning red eyes and that high-pitched voice. And poor Roger then, when he's like, oh, no wonder you hate me, and then he says, I don't hate you, and he's saying, oh, then why'd you keep pulling my ears? And he says, I apologize for pulling your ears. And even when Roger's listening, though, when it's just cute to me how, like, he has his hands over his mouth, like, he's just, and then, like, the worried look in his eyes, and he's just staring, watching Eddie and listening that whole time, as if he's, like, just, like, really listening to him, like, just, like, covering his mouth, like, not making any jokes then, just really listening about the terrible thing that happened to his brother. And then when Dolores comes back, and then when he says, you deserve a good man, Dolores, and she says, I already have a good man, they're about to kiss, and then that image is great of Roger when he's staring at them with his ears in a heart shape and his little heart eyes. He's like, oh, don't mind me. So cute. Then when he goes to Maroon, the Maroon is killed, and then we see Jessica running away, so again it looks like as if it was Jessica. And then when they go to Toontown, then there's that whole thing with the cab guy, Benny, the literal cab. And it's so funny too when then, like, the car, and he gets in a different car, driving a car. But the whole world of Toontown, when Eddie just drives through there, and then you see the sun singing, and Eddie's just, like, doesn't even want to be there. He runs into Jessica again, but then Jessica saying how she knocked out Roger so that, like, put him in the trunk so he wouldn't get hurt. And then Eddie says, oh, that makes sense. All that stuff is great with Droopy. It's like, what floor, sir? Have a good day, sir. Little Droopy, that character. And then, of course, the iconic part when Eddie is falling. All the cartoon logic in Toontown when, he's falling. And then when just you see Mickey and Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny, and still to this date, apparently, this is the first and only time that Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse were on screen together. So there you go, Disney and Looney Tunes. And this was still before Mel Blanc had passed, so he was still voicing all of the Looney Tune characters, like when we see Tweety Bird and Daffy earlier and all those characters. But the whole thing with, hey, what's up, Doc? And then, when Mickey says, oh yeah, haha, you could be killed. Oh gosh. But gives him the spare parachute, but that's just a tire. And he's like, oh yeah, ain't I a stinker? Freaking Bugs. He sure is. But then the whole showdown with Judge Doom, and Eddie then, he figures out a way to kind of outsmart him, and then when he sees the value of laughter, because then he just starts kind of making a fool of himself, singing and dancing, doing this kind of vaudevillian act, juggling, all that stuff, and then one by one his weasel henchmen are literally dying of laughter, which that's clever. And then it's a great reveal too, which I forgot too, again, I don't know, but when it's revealed that Judge Doom is in fact Attune, so after each of the weasel henchmen dies laughing, you see their souls rising up, and then when he gets steamrolled over, but then he's just flattened and he's still alive, so then he realizes he's Attune. He's just saying how, oh, I knew it, only Attune could think of something so dumb, with that whole idea of the freeway thing, how he wanted to buy out Toontown so he could just turn it into a freeway, destroy it all. And then when he destroys Judge Doom with the dip that he himself created, so there you go. But then also it's revealed how Judge Doom is the one who killed all of those people. He killed the Maroon cartoon owner guy, he killed the owner of Toontown, Marvin Ackby, and then he killed also Eddie's brother Teddy. That's great too, Eddie, Teddy. But then also the whole thing with the will, how the whole time he couldn't find the will, well then it turns out the will was with the disappearing, reappearing ink when the ink appears again on Eddie's shirt. And then Roger reading his love letter to Jessica, that's what the will had been written on. So then Toontown is a word to the tunes, as it had always been the case. So that's great. So it's a nice happy ending. And then when Roger's saying, "Oh, don't tell me you lost your sense of humor already," and then when he gives him a kiss, a call back to when Roger had kissed him earlier, and then he's saying, "What do you think?" And it's cute. And they walk off together all happy, all the tunes cheering. So it's just really great. So just such a really fun, clever movie. Such great imaginative world building again. I love all that. I love also that Roger and Jessica really do love each other. It's so sweet when she's saying, "Oh, I'll bake you. Come on, Roger, let's go home. I'll bake you a carrot cake." And it's great that Eddie then learned to, or just reconnected with and regained his sense of humor, knowing the power and importance of, even earlier when Roger was just making all of the people in the bar laugh, and he's saying everyone needs a laugh sometimes, like they needed a good laugh. So knowing the importance of laughter and joy and silliness, so that's a really great message. So it's just a really fun, really great movie, and I'm happy to end 80s Movies Month on this note, that the power of laughter really can change people, really can help people. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I'm so excited to say I will be welcoming a new guest to the podcast. I will be interviewing Nick Adams. Nick is an author and TV writer whose writing credits include New Girl, Blackish, Tuca and Birdie, and one of my all-time favorites, BoJack Horseman. I'm so excited to be talking to him and to learn more about his career. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.